Hello everyone, my name is Nevin Barnett and welcome to Fitnesslogik Radio, the show where we explore the world of fitness, wellness and self-improvements with experts and inspirational figures. I'm thrilled to have a very special guest with us today, a renowned yoga instructor, fitness expert, podcaster and author. She's been empowering individuals worldwide to transform their lives, both mentally and physically. I'm pretty sure you've already seen some of her work, and if it's not the case, this will be a treat. Today, we're privileged to have Shona Vertue on the show. Shona brings a unique perspective to the world of fitness and well-being, combining yoga, strength training, and mindfulness practice to help individuals achieve their goals and find balance in their life. In this episode, we're going to delve into her journey, her expert insights, and her tips for living a healthier, happier life. I was lucky to meet Shona on a freediving course we did together, and she's truly an amazing person and very inspirational for me. So without further ado, let's dive into an enlightening conversation with the one and only Shona Vertue. Shona, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Super excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited too.
So as we were just saying before starting the recording, could you maybe quickly present yourself, explain a bit where you've come from, where you are now, and we'll start from there after.
Yes, I feel like I've done this so many times, but every time
Yeah.
I still stumble. But basically, I grew up as an elite gymnast and went from training 24 hours a week to quitting that and choosing to engage in a sort of normal, somewhat quote unquote normal life. Moved into dance and was dancing pretty much full-time as well, so it was not normal by any means. But movement was a very important part of my life, movement and training, to, I guess, recover from some of the injuries that I'd sustained through, not so much through gymnastics, but after quitting gymnastics, I got into yoga and Pilates. Pilates was recommended by the dance school that I was in, and yoga was something that I just kind of came to. Over time, I started to realize that this was something that I really fell in love with. So I became a teacher. What I often forget to kind of mention in this whole process is we're probably at about maybe like 19 or 20 now. And I'm also working full-time in a corporate job because I was like, dance is not going to pay the bills. I'm going to get a regular job and just feel safe and be able to do this. But the problem was that I just did not suit a sort of desk job 9 hours a day. And arguably, I don't know if anyone does suit that, but it's such is life, right? We just have to pay the bills. So I took that life and it just wasn't working for me. It wasn't working for my body. Injuries kept cropping up. So I started really trying to ramp up the yoga because that was often what the narrative was like, well, yoga will fix you, go and stretch more if you have back problems, things like that. I was lucky enough to start dating a personal trainer who was like, you need to train weights, actually. And so he taught me how to lift a little, essentially. And through that, I was like, wow, maybe I need to do more weight training. I decided to get qualified as a yoga teacher, started teaching people yoga, but realized that I wasn't helping them fully if I wasn't also qualified in weight training and understood how weight training and programming for strength would be helpful for people. So I then decided to become a personal trainer. And then I guess the rest is kind of history. I spent a long time being a personal trainer, working through strength and flexibility, recognizing that there was a bit of an issue because I could write a great program. I could really coach people through nutritional awareness. I even started doing a degree in nutrition. I could also get them to sort of relax through meditation practices, but there was something missing, and that was the behavioral aspect. I was like, how do I get people to do this? Well, I can't get people to do this unless I have an understanding of psychology and human behavior, hence the psychology degree. So I was like, I need to understand how to help people to understand the underlying mechanisms of their behavior to essentially be able to apply some of these things. So now we are here today.
And that process, obviously you're doing that over 3 minutes, but in reality, it took a few years. I think we're about the same age actually. So we've been through our fitness journey. I know when I met you and we spoke together, I felt that you kind of wanted to detach yourself a bit from the traditional fitness, like views. Maybe also, like in Australia, it's very correlated to competition, like aesthetics, like how you look and
Mm.
everything. And obviously, we all care to a certain extent of how we look, right? It's
Yeah.
still important, but that is not at all like your perception or what you want to do in the industry now. And what I really appreciate with your content, and I know it's not easy as a content creator, is like you want to touch on many subjects. Like you want to speak about like movement, you want to speak about health, you want to speak
Yeah.
about mental health and everything. So how do you juggle all that? And because it
Mm.
is very hard, right?
It is really hard because especially the way that social media is moving nowadays, and the trend that we see is that you have to really be very skilled at reducing the nuance actually in what you're saying. And that contradicts, and maybe I'll get over it one day, but that to me contradicts health in general. Because we know that it's not black and white. It's very, very gray, and, or I would say colorful. And therefore we can't, it's very difficult to like have integrity and at the same time provide something that engages someone enough in that quick, short sound bite so that they click on it, engage with it, but still doesn't lose the integrity. So for example, like everyone needs strength training. That you could definitely say is like maybe a broad thing, but it's like within that, there are all these different
Context.
potential. Yeah, exactly. It's all context dependent. Or when people say like I have a good one is like back pain, for example, and it's like,
Yeah.
and so people want me to say, here are 3 stretches to fix your back pain. And I'm like, well, if that was the case, then we wouldn't have a back pain epidemic,
Yeah.
right? But it's like actually pain can be coming from like a nociception of like that's heightened, nociception being pain perception. I know you know that. I'm just saying if anyone that doesn't. But essentially it's like that pain perception can be impacted by your emotional state, your hydration levels, whether you've done strength training or not, or yes, of course, whether you've stretched or what kind of stress levels you have. So there's so many things that can impact it that it becomes really hard. But if I say all that on Instagram, the likelihood
That's
of someone clicking on that is very low.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just gonna cut you because like this is a concept that you've kind of brought up, which I really like, and that people don't speak enough. And you've spoken about it on your podcast. I can't remember which episode, but I invite people to go and find your episode.
Thank
It's
you.
the biopsychosocial model,
Model. Yes.
and
Hmm.
when you're speaking about pain or back pain, it's also the same, right? It's like
Absolutely.
it's so important to remind people that. And yes, like you will not have like 3 stretches who are going to like potentially cure your back. Maybe for one person, it's going to work,
Yeah.
but like you don't like the difference between someone who's completely sedentary, like sitting on in front of a desk all day, and someone who's working on the field and potentially same symptoms but like completely different causes, right?
Totally.
So
Totally. And that's what makes it hard. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. um So you're training currently to be a psychologist, right? Like
Yes.
when did you start going back to study? And that's something that is like interesting, I feel, because I remember when I was around 27 years old, I was not content with my professional life, and I was like, should have been a doctor. Like I messed up. Like, but I was like, oh, 27, like it's way too late, which is wrong, right? And I
Sure.
didn't go this way. Well, I changed completely because I used to be an engineer. But did you think about that, like when you were like, oh, I want to know more about psychology to help me in my current like activity? Or is that
Yeah.
something that, yeah, can you
Well,
talk about that?
so basically, the psychology one is interesting because I had actually started the degree when I was 19, and I came to it actually around. Actually, I'd started the degree before I started the yoga teacher training because I was like, oh, I really had a fascination with human psychology essentially, and for many reasons. One, I grew up in a very tumultuous, I had a tumultuous childhood. My parents divorced, but it was like very violent isn't the right word. It was just very tumultuous. It was very like fiery, very dramatic. And I had to go to, because of how kind of like aggressive it was between my parents, I had to go to a lot of child counseling because they were using I was an only child at the time. I have a half sister now, but they were using a lot of what was discussed in the sessions to basically in the family courts to try to determine who should get custody. And so I would sit down with this counselor, with this psychologist, and they would observe me playing with my parents or drawing by myself and doing things. And I mean, I was 4 years old, so I was very young, but I remember thinking like, these guys think that I don't know what's going on and they're treating me like a child. Now, I understand that they have to. Retrospectively, I'm like, well, they couldn't just treat me like an adult. However, it prompted me to think like, I want to do this job and I want to do it better. And so when I was 19, I was like, okay, yes, I've done dance and yes, I've got this performing arts background, but actually I want to go to uni and I want to become a psychologist. So I went in and I am 19 years old. Like, who do I think I am? And for the record, anyone that's currently listening to this that's 19, that's doing a psych degree, amazing. Like, do your thing, get it done if you can. If you can't, don't think that life is over and that you'll never be able to do it again. Because in actual fact, I think that degree should actually have an age cutoff. Like, as in, I actually think it should have an age minimum. That being said, obviously everyone comes to life in different ways. So age is just a number. We know this. However, I really didn't have the maturity to approach the degree the way that I think I needed to have. And that's not to say that I wasn't mature enough for the concepts, but more that I didn't have enough life to apply to some of these concepts. I also, you're just filled with hormones. You're just like, I couldn't sit there and concentrate. I didn't care. I didn't care about trying to regurgitate Freud or regurgitate some, BF Skinner about behavior, because I didn't really I had no context to go on other than my own life context.
But don't you think that's true for every field, not just psychology? Because look at
Possibly.
PT, like
Possibly.
how you coach when you're like 19 years old or 20 years old to like after 10 years of experience is also totally different, because you actually have the psychological and life experience that comes like an input into it.
Yes. So to come back to your question, like, it isn't ever too late, actually. And if anything, I think if you are going to ask me what's more important, being young enough or being, old enough, I sort of feel like, don't be afraid if you have lived a whole life beforehand, because the reality is you'll be able to apply that to most of what you do.
I think psychology is like not used enough. I think in our industry, like as a whole, in fitness, it's like, oh, calories in, calories out. Like, we could, and it's interesting because we're both, I would say, from kind of the evidence-based crowd, but at the same time, we understand that it's like data is data and it shows you something, but it doesn't take away like life experience, like all the context, which is very important, and the individual. Like there's so much like differences from one person to another, and an average doesn't always like take into account that aspect. I think you did a post about that not so long ago about like
yeah, I mean, I think that the most important thing to recognize is that like data is beautiful because it can provide us like an overarching kind of story if we look at like data trends, for example. But it doesn't give us like the intricate kind of plot, if that makes sense. And so you can use data to guide you, knowing that sometimes life will come in and create some kind of variability that throws that or skews that data slightly. And like, this is what, in psychology and psychological research, like that's one of the hardest things is because you're not studying matter. Yeah. You might be studying behavior, but you're also trying to study things that are like inside someone's head. Yeah. And so to operationalize those things is really difficult. I think you're right. I think like psychology isn't utilized enough I think that some of the stuff that I've learned in this degree should have been taught to me when I did my PT work, because it's understanding that relational experience. Don't you think that PTs, we have this like weird very close relationship with our clients in a way that I don't mean that in an inappropriate way, although that happens too, but I more mean
Yeah.
we have this like, so some of the things that I've been privy to across my career as a PT, so not so much online PT, but as a PT when I was working one-on-one with people, was like I'd hear about their failing marriages. I'd hear about cheating, both from the cheater and the cheatee. I'd hear about, children doing things that were impacting the entire family. I mean, you're just subject to it because when people are exercising, they're in a sort of vulnerable state and they're just kind of, it's like this therapy session. So to me, PT courses and PT as a whole and PTs would really benefit from understanding some of this stuff, not so that they can be their psychologist, but so that they can understand what to do with that information and then maybe, refer out or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I think it's a big part of personal training. And when you see usually the best results you have with people is the people you are the closest to. You
Yes.
understand the best, because then you can implement the changing in their habits that they can actually sustain. Like just going
Yes.
to them and being like, okay, this is your meal plan, this is your training. If you follow this, is gonna work. And it's like, yeah, but like, how do you make them like actually change their lifestyle to follow these like new guidelines who gonna get them to the results?
Can I ask you a question then?
Yeah.
So how do
Reverse.
you reverse podcast. So something that I found difficult, and this may just be indicative of my personality, is that I had always had trouble with boundaries as a personal trainer. So things would lean into being a bit more of a psychology session, which the other end of that spectrum is that your clients become so close that it's very difficult to implement, like, not so much an authority, but it's like
Yeah, to stay neutral, to
to stay
be.
neutral. Yes,
Yeah.
or more so like, so something that's really beneficial, I think, about the PT relationship is that, and people often say this, right? Clients will often say, like, I just need someone to be accountable to.
Yeah.
But if you fall too much to the end of the like psychology side of things, a psychologist's role is to remain neutral, actually, and to remain sort of like, I don't have any judgment over what you do. Now, not that
Mm.
our role as a PT is to be judgmental, but it's still to hold some kind of like standard to their behaviors throughout their week so that they get their results, right? So I wondered how you maintain those boundaries with your clients that you get close to.
Well, I think it's always about communicating on making them responsible for the results. That's very
That's
important.
interesting.
It's making them accountable in that way also. It's like, yes, I'm
Mm,
here to help you, but like you're making the changes on your daily life that are gonna like drive the results. So I think that's a very important, not to take like all the responsibility from the client as you get closer and closer and be like, oh yeah, so maybe we'll try this or try that. Like uh, I think you need to stay professional, especially like you've spoken about that, but like that's unfortunately something you see like way too much in the industry, like with
yeah.
coaching having like a kind of a dark side to it, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, but then I think everyone's going to do mistakes. Like I've done mistakes in the past where I felt that I was getting too close to someone I was coaching, and not like in a relationship side. I mean, in the
Mm-mm-mm.
terms of like I felt like my decisions were starting to be biased because like I
Yeah.
like kind of the Pygmalion effect of like not wanting to be hard enough on someone because like, oh yeah, but
Totally.
maybe she will not be able to follow that, or oh,
Yes.
he's a bit tired at the moment, maybe we should like deload and everything, instead of looking more at the data and being like, no, actually,
Yes.
like just implement, take your feelings and emotion out of that like coaching and just carry on. And I think that's what I do is, of course there's communication, of course there's understanding, but I still coach with data and I try to
Yeah.
follow that and see where we're going, and then like my decisions are based on that more than like the emotions that I'm feeling, in a sense.
Agree wholeheartedly, which is why you need to be good at both. It's like you have to be sensitive enough to your client as well as your own cognitive biases, which is where psychology can also obviously help as well. But then also, yeah, it's looking for the trends in the data and looking at like the data overall, not becoming like hyper fixated on it either, but also definitely still letting it be the thing that guides you for sure.
So do you think everyone can lose weight? Super hard question, but like the more you get into psychology, the more you understand that like calories in, calories out is still true, but like there's so
Yes.
much more to it. And
Yes.
if so many people are struggling with losing weight, like what do you think is the biggest culprit, like in
Ooh.
that aspect?
Well, I don't know whether I can say what is necessarily the biggest culprit, because like I don't that so recently I just had to write a paper on like not a journal paper, but like an assignment, which was on essentially looking at some of the psychological risk factors for obesity
Mm.
and overweight. And there's lots of different psychological factors, but some interesting ones that came up actually were something called ACE. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah.
That one is very out of the scope of like what a PT should be handling. However, in some cases, if you have a client that has, that has obesity, it's worth asking them if they've ever done that ACE test, which is a series of questions, and it just looks at, what like how many or how traumatic essentially was your childhood? How many of these adverse experiences did you have? And what they found in the research is that anything above a 4 has a insanely high correlation with obesity, like insanely. And there's a really interesting story about it, which I won't go into, but definitely worth making a mental note of that and looking at the research that led to, or the story that led to creating this ACE test. Now, that's one thing that can be a huge contributing factor. So if you have a client with obesity, and they have a very high level of adverse childhood experiences, but you just keep pushing them to change their behavior, and you're like, my God, why can't you just get this? Literally, like, stick to your behaviors. You're not being accountable to me. You're failing me as a client. Like, that's so not just insensitive, but also you're completely missing the fact that there could be this whole other realm of results that they could be getting through unpacking their psychology, obviously not with you, the PT, but through other mechanisms. And you can still remain their trainer and help them with their behavior and training in other ways, but just enable them or help open their mind to the idea that maybe this is a factor, a contributing factor. Another thing that's really interesting that I found when writing this was, or researching this, was on ageism. So ageism, the way that what they've started to find is a pattern in the perspective that people have of aging as a concept is also correlated with weight gain later in life. So if you have a really bad perspective on age and on aging, then the likelihood of you having obesity, having
Mhm.
overweight later in life is much higher than if you have a sense of like positivity towards it, or you're not afraid of it, or you kind of welcome it. And I mean, there's lots of reasons for why that could be. I don't have all the mechanistic reasons for exactly what that reason, what that likelihood is, but
I.e.,
essentially,
like I'm getting older, so I'm gonna get fat, basically.
yeah, it's kind of like, oh, this is part of getting older,
Yeah.
and you have that sort of negative, closed mindset around it. Whereas if you have a positive mindset around it, or even just like an accepting aspect of it, then it's like this kind of essentially the research showed that people were more likely to engage in exercise and health practices and health behaviors in a more
Mhm.
committed way than people who negatively looked at aging. And I mean, all this stuff is like logical, but it's not stuff that we think of when we look at things like calories in, calories out, which is
But do you,
physiologically a law, but it's just not taking
I
into account the behaviors.
yeah, I think so many PTs would benefit from, like sending their client. It's not sending, sorry. It's referring their
Referring.
client to to a psychologist or to get help on that side. I feel they don't, because it's kind of also a ego thing, of being like, oh, I'm not
Mm,
able to help this person with like what I've been
yeah.
implementing for so long that has worked for so many people, and like it's her fault, like it's hard to
Yeah.
question your practice and being like, oh no, it's not my fault. It's just that like what I'm asking her to do is too hard for her at this point to change, basically change her habits, change her. There's a concept that you've spoken about also, like is a CBT,
Hmm.
cognitive behavioral therapy.
Therapy. Hmm.
Do you think that is something that like personal trainers could maybe like
Yes.
implement a bit in their practice, and if you can explain it and like how, or how you would see
Yeah.
things?
Yeah. So cognitive behavioral therapy is essentially an approach to therapy that looks at two things: your cognitions and your behaviors. Makes sense. And so um, our cognitions obviously impact our behavior, and our behavior then has like this cyclical effect and impacts our cognition. So, cognitive behavioral therapy is about looking at and I guess holding up a mirror to or shining a light on things that might be a little bit like that we're unaware of because we're just locked in behavior. And so, by shining a light on some of your cognitions, these deeper underlying thoughts and beliefs that we may have, we can then start to uncover some of the areas in which maybe there's a cognitive dissonance or there's a distortion, and I'll go into that in a second. But really, CBT, what's amazing about it is that it just has, so when CBT is combined with other like health interventions, even if it's not medicalized, but with medicine as well, really improves the efficacy of someone or the results someone's going to achieve. So essentially, if you were to put cognitive behavioral therapy or some of the exercises, even just the homework, alongside other health interventions, it just basically is kind of like a booster. I don't want to say steroid, but let's just call it a steroid. It just helps basically people engage with it more. So an example of an exercise is one of the biggest things is to kind of uncover your cognitive distortions. Now, in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's this concept called a schema. Have you ever heard of that? A schema?
No.
So a schema is like, we all have schemas. They're just mental frameworks of how we
Okay.
perceive the world. So like, I have a schema of a bottle in my mind that I formed when I was a baby or maybe slightly older, right? And so I know that it's going to like maybe hold some liquid. So there's certain features about it, but that's an object. So we have schemas about a bunch of things. We have schemas about exercise, about relationships, about all kinds of things. And they form when we're young. They can be changed by traumatic experiences or like big life-changing experiences. So if I have a car accident that involves like a bottle getting pushed through my neck, I don't know why I'm thinking of something so violent, but anyway, then that's going to contribute to my feelings about bottles in some way, right? And so that changes the schema slightly. But for the most part, they say that these are fairly static throughout your life. So they're fairly like they can be quite hard to change unless you start to do the behavioral and cognitive work around trying to unpack it a little bit. So something I always bring up with people is like, what's your schema around exercise? What is it to you, and what is your relationship with it? So some people are like, I'm a fit person, I always have been, I love exercise, I love the way it makes me feel. And those people, when we get them as clients, they don't tend to be too difficult to encourage towards their health behaviors. If we get someone who says, I'm overweight, I want to change my life, I'm really committed, I'm so committed, I'm so ready, but somehow their behavior just doesn't seem to match what they want. If you go through their cognitions around exercise and you start to figure out like, okay, well, how do you really feel about it? It's like, well, I've never been a sporty person. When I was younger, for example, like I never got picked in school to be part of the sports team. And so I've just never really liked it. It really makes me feel uncomfortable. So when you get to those, you can kind of say, okay, but can you see how that that belief you have around exercise might be contraindicating the results that you want to achieve. So let's try to rewrite this narrative. Let's try to change the way you feel about exercise. Now, here's the part that's really important, is that the only way to really change a cognition, you can think as much as you want, but is through behavior. And so that's why I like that saying, like, the only way is through. Like, the only way that you're going to come to like exercise is if you do it more. And if you start to pay attention to those things around exercise, like the way it makes you feel, like the strength it gives you, like those sorts of things. So we need the behavioral part. And so it's not just cognitive therapy, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, because they both have an interrelationship with each other.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying. It kind of resonates a lot with what we talk about in the course. We speak about intrinsic motivation, and how
Yeah.
we get people to, because there's this whole belief of motivation in fitness about, like, yeah, like, tomorrow is Monday, and that Monday, motivation is just gonna come out of nowhere, and I'm gonna go to gym and stick to my diet and everything. And we explained that it comes literally through three key components, which are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And what you were speaking about is like, competence is very important, because
Yeah.
when you start doing something and you get better at it, you stick to it way easily, like, and the more you do it, the more autonomous you get to it, at it also. And that's what I see through coaching, like, and this is how we get, like, I think the best result is, like, the more the client becomes autonomous and, like, competent in what they're doing, the more, like, the motivation kind of disappears, and it just becomes like a habit,
So
and
true.
you were speaking about self-efficacy also. I think
Your
that's
self-efficacy. Yes,
yeah, I
yes.
think that's a great concept, which kind of, like, uh,
It definitely marries, like,
blends with
what
all
you're
that.
saying about,
Yeah.
yeah, and also marries competence. Like, that's I mean, essentially, it's the same thing, right? Because self-efficacy is really looking at, how much do you believe that you're going to be able to achieve said behavior, right? So, like, some people might have high self-efficacy around, like, their job, but not so much weight training or exercise. And so if you have low self-efficacy, you don't think that you can achieve it or do it or engage with it, then what they found in psychological research, particularly health psychology research, is that anyone with low self-efficacy around a particular health behavior is unlikely to engage with that behavior. And so that's why, in like, all through fitness, the narrative, and even in, government health initiatives, the narrative is always like, it just takes 5 minutes a day to get it done. You can do it in the ad breaks. You can do it here and there. And as people, like, I'm sure, I don't know, I guess I can't speak for you, but I definitely, prior to understanding why that was an important part of, like, advertising or encouraging people, is it irked me. I was like, that's lying to people. It doesn't just take 5 minutes a day. But I realize now the importance of like, obviously step by step. So yes, maybe it is going to start at 5 minutes a day for some people, but also acknowledging that we're trying to make it seem achievable. How do you hold the integrity and still be like, it's
It's really hard.
achievable, but it's also hard. And
I
so,
I don't know
yeah.
if you know the book, Atomic Habits,
Yes, I
from James
do.
Clear. Yeah, he speaks about the 2-minute rules also, in
Yeah,
a way of implementing a new habit. And I think when you explain it like that, you can, keep your integrity and be like, yeah, okay, like, just do 5 minutes of training today, because, like, if you take 5 minutes, usually you're gonna do longer. You're gonna do, maybe, even for someone who doesn't want to train, they're gonna be, ah, I'm there, like, I'm just gonna do like 15, 20 minutes, and it's better than nothing, right?
it's still better than nothing. And it's like, yeah, exactly. It's that I feel like I need 10 minutes. I feel like 5 minutes, I'll be like, oh, this is a waste of time and it's hard. I feel like I need 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, I tend to be like, I mean, I would say like 99%. I don't know if I've ever left. In fact, I don't think I've ever left something, even when I started at a really low motivation to kind of engage with it. I've never stopped at 10 minutes.
That's my biggest struggle in life, especially for books or films. Like I'm
Got it.
so bad at like starting a book and being like, this book is shit, or like I'm not like getting into
Yes.
it, and be like, no, I need to finish it to be sure. And then I finished the book and I was like, oh, I could have stopped like at like 30 pages, and it would have been like another waste of time. And it's every time I'm telling myself like, the time you're spending reading this book that you don't like is the time you're like losing not reading another book that you would actually like or learn from. And it's so, I don't know, is that something you have also, or can you
I
just stop
don't
something?
I can stop books. I probably have that in relationships.
Oh wow.
Not
All
the
right.
current relationship, but it's like, I mean, everything, it's so funny. I'm like, oh, I wish that was my problem with the book as opposed to
Mm,
people, where it's like, I sort of have definitely experienced the sunk cost fallacy many times with people, where it's like I can't leave something because I'm like, no, but we've come this far. Can I just keep? What about next week? What if I tried this thing, to the
mm,
detriment of my own health and well being? So I think for different things, I can definitely shut them down. But so I could put down a book that I wasn't interested in 100%. Can I put down a person? No. And then like not put
interesting.
them down to kill them, but like
Yeah, yeah.
even if something is somewhat wasting my time, destructive, whatever, it's like that's
Mm,
the thing I have to get to the end to. I'm like searching for the rock bottom in a way, to see like, okay, but is this failure, or is there something around the corner that could help me go further?
yeah, I see what you mean.
Not
This is
healthy.
actually something I wanted to talk to you about, because you have a big presence on social media, and we know that it's not always easy to manage like your personal life and your professional like image, of like a Shona Vertue. Um, how do you balance that? How do you see things? Because you're pretty transparent, like, and at the same time, I guess that you still like keep stuff for yourself. Like, this is
Mm.
something that's been very hard for me, personally, because I really,
Hard, hard in what way do you find it hard personally?
well, initially when I started like working online, I literally didn't want to be online at all. Like, I
Mm.
wanted to just like build this business, and like, okay, I don't want to put my face anywhere. And then I
Mhm.
understood that personal branding is important. People kind of appreciate, and I was like, okay, I'm going to compromise on the negative aspects of, like social media, and like how it affects my life in a sense, because that's
Mm.
how I'm going to have a bigger impact, and I'm going to be able to help more people, and it's kind of the trade-off I have to make in a sense.
Yes.
But at the same time, I don't share much. I
Of your personal
may,
life.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I don't know if I have the answer to this, because it is something that's ongoing for me as a struggle. I think in my I mean, I've been on Instagram for quite some time now. When did I mean, I started, I had an account when Instagram came out. It was just like me sharing pictures of like the beach or whatever. It wasn't really anything business related, even though I was a personal trainer at the time. Instagram wasn't used in that way. Then I built my personal training business in Sydney, and that wasn't through Instagram. Moved to London, worked at some commercial gyms, thinking I would be able to do what I did in Sydney in London. And I mean, the models that they were using in London were like insane. I was getting paid like £6 an hour, £8 an hour to do a job that was like, they were charging the clients £120. And so I was like, can barely pay for food. And this is when I first had moved to London, and I was like, this is not okay. So I quit and started renting a space in a gym, just renting like a sort of cubicle area that I could train people in. But I didn't really have any clients, because I was like, well, this is just a little tiny space. How do I get them? So then I was like, okay, I'm going to start just, I guess, advertising on social media and being like, hey, I do these sessions. And then that's what prompted me to start sharing different tips and things like that. I'd never had the intention of like growing a massive Instagram account. It was just purely like, I'll share this and then I'll meet people that are interested in the way that I train. And I did, and I built a client base out of this small space in London. And anyway, from there, it continued to grow. Social media continued to grow, and then all kinds of other opportunities grew out of that. And the thing that has always been a theme has been, yes, as you've said, touched on, people want to buy from other people, not brands. And so the interesting line that you have to kind of like walk along is a personal brand, because you're still a brand to a degree, but it has to be personal enough so that there is some kind of commercial success but also commercial closeness, or personal closeness with commercial success. So something that I've always struggled with is like, okay, well, I know that people want to see into my personal life to a degree because you feel more related to the person who's sharing something about themselves, right? And it makes you feel closer to them, and therefore you're more likely to be like, yes, okay, well, this person believes in XYZ and I believe in that too, and therefore I'm gonna listen to what they say about whatever. The tricky part is that the more you give, the more you're subject to obviously criticism about your personal choices, which then implicates like how you feel about yourself. And so you're constantly questioning your own personal choices, and it can create this like underlying anxiety around like, have I made the right decision here to present myself in this way, but this is my authentic self, but then other people don't like it. And so, yeah, you're sort of met with this like thing of like juggling how much of your personal life you give insight into, because whatever you give insight into, people are going to have an opinion on. As I've gotten older and as I've spent longer periods of time on Instagram, I realized that that's just my own ego having an attachment to what those people think of me. And so to some degree, I have to accept that not everyone's going to appreciate the way that I live my life. And I only share things that I'm comfortable having other people, strangers, criticize me for, if that makes sense. So, for example, I recently shared, that I'm pregnant and I'm having a baby, and I had an influx of people, and I spent a long time waiting to do that. I kind of knew that I was going to receive two kinds of feedback, some positive, and then I was waiting for a cohort of people to come through to tell me about how disappointed they were that I was having children. And that was what I got.
Really?
So, yeah, I got
That's
a lot
crazy.
of women. I had like a lot of women, especially, write to me saying like, I always followed you because you seemed like you were, and this is what I found interesting, an independent woman who didn't need all that stuff. I was like, well, why can't you be independent and be I just didn't understand what like how you're conflating the two together. Like, how are you saying that if I'm wanting to engage in the maternal side of my life and expression as being something that means that I'm no longer independent? So it was an interesting projection, I guess, from people, but I was waiting for it. And then I had some people say like, actually is really hard to watch you do that because that's something I want so much. And so I'm going to unfollow you, or I'm going to disconnect for a while because it's quite triggering for me. And like, that's totally okay. Like, I understand that perspective for sure, but I just knew that I was going to be met with something. So in sharing it, I was like, I'm going to share this knowing that some people will criticize. Now, there are some things about my life, I don't want to call them secrets, they're just my life, that I don't share on social media because I'm not ready to have a whole bunch of strangers jump on me about whether that's an okay or not okay way to live my life. And so it's just, you just have to make that decision.
So basically, you share what you're absolutely confident that because what I see is like is maybe the scary part of like when a lot of people question your choices, you start questioning your own choices.
Totally. And I think that's completely human nature to be like that. I mean, I know there are some people out there that seem like very like high conviction and they can share, but that's because they've also made that decision to be high conviction in that particular thing. And this is what I've come to realize, is that even those people, and I've met them, no matter how high conviction they come across online, there's going to be some area of their life that they're not quite ready yet to share, or that they're not quite, and that's completely okay. Like we shouldn't be expecting content creators in any industry, any format, to be like sharing something that they don't feel comfortable with sharing. And it's very easy to criticize people for not being authentic. It's like the irony of that is that I'm like, hey, like nothing on this is authentic truly, because the very act of consuming something on a phone or on a computer or anything is in and of itself not the same as real life. So we have to accept that. Just because it's that's the thing that frustrates me. It feels like real life, but it's not at all.
But you know how it is like, even for you and me, we know it's not real life. And still, like, we consume content and it goes through our eyes, hits our brain, and we kind of like, we can't, every time we consume something, tell ourselves it's not true, it's not true, it's not true, because it's there, and it's so hard, you know. Like I would see it like in many years ago when I was consuming, you know, a lot more fitness content and comparing my physique with, you know, with like other like fitness people, fitness competitors, and everything. And you're always like, you know, it's like potentially a photo shoot, good lighting, peak prep and everything, and still you're like, oh yeah, but he looks better than me, or something like that. You know, it's terrible.
Totally. Well, but the thing is like, so there's this thing called social comparison theory. Leon Festinger, psychologist, a social psychologist, many, many years ago created it, or founded the theory essentially. But you've probably heard of like upward and downward social comparisons. So like an upward social comparison is where we look at someone and we're like, whoa, you guys, you're amazing. Like someone who might be wealthier or better looking or whatever we might perceive them to be. Downward social comparison is looking at someone and being like, wow, I'm in a better place than you. Now, the idea behind this theory is that like we have to have a sort of balance of these upward and downward social comparisons in order to sort of feel a sense of harmony in our existence. Like some upward is okay because we can aspire and it pushes us. Too much is not good. Now, one of the biggest issues with social media at the moment is that now, at first, I thought that it was that we had too many upward social comparisons. And there was definitely a period where there was like a lot of upward social comparisons. It was like, it's everyone's highlight reel. It's everyone's like, just perfectly edited imagery. And now that's still the case in fitness, definitely. But now what I find that we're having is a mix, but we have like extreme downward social comparisons where we feel like, oh, I should be more grateful. And then at the same time, we have extreme upward social comparisons where it's like, this person has made $100 million in 2 weeks and they have a private jet and they're blah, blah, blah. And it's like all these things. And this is where it causes this like huge, like just discomfort in our existence. I honestly think that the only way is to use them, to use them like, or to be measured with your use, just like you would be measured with your use with hyper palatable foods or with cigarettes or with like any of the things that, you know, might be quote unquote bad for us. I mean, definitely cigarettes are not great for us in any context, but let's just say like foods, for example. Food is not good or bad. It's only bad in certain contexts where there's an excess or there's an excess of a certain type, right? And I think that can be the same for social media. I think in and of itself, it's not good or bad, actually. It can be really good in some circumstances, can be really bad in the wrong context, or if we overconsume it. And so I think it's just about being measured, but I think we don't see it like that yet.
Hello there. If you enjoyed the podcast and find it valuable, I have a small favor to ask. Could you please take a moment to leave a positive review on your podcast platform? Your feedback means the world to me and helps others discover the show. And if you really love what I do, consider sharing the podcast with a friend who might benefit from it. Your support helps to grow the show and I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for being an awesome part of this community. I know I'm comparing myself to you often and I'm seeing like all the stuff that you do, all the content that you post, and I'm always like, damn, she's getting so much done. Could
really?
maybe you
Gosh.
amazing. I'm impressed always. Maybe could you share, like, because we were sharing emails and I saw that you were using Superhuman, which is
Yeah.
an application that helps to treat email like faster. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Like, I'm happy I'm using it too because I'm doing like Shona.
I love that.
um,
Yes. I
do you
love
have like
Superhuman.
more maybe like tools or maybe tips that like helps
Yes.
you be more productive?
Yes, yes. In fact, I'm just going to open it up right now. Look, I'm getting my phone up. For anyone that's just listening,
She's
I've
such a
I've
geek like me.
touched my phone, but I use this app. Okay, this app is ridiculous in the sense that like I could just manually do it. Okay, I could definitely manually enter in all my tasks, try to span it across my week, but I don't. And I have the luxury of being able to afford to subscribe to this app called Motion AI. Have you heard of Motion?
Yeah, of course.
Sounds like I'm definitely don't have like shares in this company. I'm not selling it. I'm not getting commission. But because I'm trying to juggle uni and full-time uni, so I have like many different assignments that I'm trying to get through, lectures to watch, quizzes to do, like all kinds of things through that. Then I also have certain projects that I'm trying to get finished because I am my own boss essentially. I have people that work
Manage.
for me that I have to manage. And so it's like, I need to make sure I'm on top of that. There's just too many things to adhere to. And then let's add training in on top of that.
Yeah.
So what I like about Motion is that it's AI that all I have to do is enter in every task, every project that I'm doing and give some deadlines to them. You can do a soft deadline, so like aiming for an April release or aiming for a November release, or you can do a hard deadline. It's like 24th, this essay is due. And so what it does is it syncs with your calendar. So it looks at all the events you have across, and then you decide the hours that you're going to be willing to sit at your desk to do work or willing to do work on the project. And I'm going to show you in the screen. But basically, so I'm going to have to explain it for people that are just listening. But essentially, what it's doing is it's splitting all my tasks. So, for example, after this podcast, I've got to work on the psychology of eating essay that I have to write.
So
After that, yes.
sorry to cut you. So you
No, go.
organize your day by blocks of work specifically to a certain task. That's how you organize yourself?
Exactly.
Okay.
Perfect summary.
Thank you. um, are you very are you very strict on your days? Like, could you like tell us? Like, do you have like a classic day where you have like certain blocks for training, for
Mm.
working, and everything, or does it change depending on the day, weekdays, weekends?
Well, lately it's really been at the mercy of that app because it's been able to like put things in accordingly, provided I've got all the tasks and events that have gone in. So as soon as a new event comes in, something new in my calendar, it'll just like rearrange everything. And
Mhm.
so it does it automatically. I don't have to worry about doing that. Look, there are definite like non-negotiable elements of my day. So I
Brushing
find
your
that if I
teeth?
train brushing my teeth and making sure I drink some water. No. So, so there's definitely non-negotiables. I'm not gonna tell you that I sit down and meditate for 20 minutes every morning and every evening. Like, I don't have morning routines like that.
I'm
I
disappointed.
definitely Pardon?
I'm disappointed.
Disappointed. Yeah, sorry. I mean, I used to. It's just like I just don't have the capacity to do that. And I know that once a baby's in my life as well, that's going to be a whole other kettle of fish to try and juggle as well
Yep.
and at the mercy of them. So I actually try to maintain a level of adaptability and flexibility throughout my day without necessarily having like a firm block. That being said, I do have some non-negotiables, which is like try to exercise in the morning as opposed to pushing it later in the day, just because
Hmm.
I find that exercise in the morning does feel better for my cognition throughout the rest of the day. So when I'm focusing on tasks, the biggest issue is if I sit down straight away, and this depends on the exercise, by the way. So I definitely feel like if it's a big, demanding strength session, then it actually messes with my cognition for the rest of the day. And I actually find it hard to get back onto tasks. So if
That's
it's a
how I
strength
feel.
session, so if it's a strength session, I actually push it back a little bit. If it's cardio or something that's a little bit more less neurologically demanding, then I'm fine to do it in the morning, and it kind of like gets me up and focused. But yeah, anything like really demanding, I have to push that a little bit later
So you
in the day.
usually
So
wake up, do some physical activity, and then start working?
Yes, some kind of
Interesting.
physical activity. Yeah, exactly. And I will do some sort of like stillness practice in some way, but it's normally like first thing as soon as I wake up, I sit up in bed and it's just like maybe it's taking like 10 deep breaths or it's just kind of focusing because there's always I don't know if anyone else has this, but there's always quite a bit of noise in my mind when I first wake up. And
Mm.
so sometimes those are like ideas. Sometimes they're like concepts that are coming to me that I want to talk about or share or just reminders of things I have to do. So I just try to like take a moment of stillness before I engage into that type of cognition, if that makes sense.
And do you have like do you do a walk, or do you do like something like that? Like, do you structure also like that, kind of
Yeah.
balancing both?
So it's really funny. Like my life changes based on the environment I'm in.
Mm.
I my Australian lifestyle versus my UK lifestyle is a little bit different. So
Yeah.
my Australian lifestyle is definitely like wake up, like sit, do some breath work, go for a walk, and then sit at my desk. You know, get that bipedal kind of like I need to make sure that I connect to that. So that I get the light on my retina, as Huberman
Yeah.
always talks about, things like that. And I know that that's good for me. I just can't seem to engage with it when I'm in London because when I leave my flat, I'm not really walking somewhere very romantic. It's sort of like, I'm in the city. Okay. All right. Smog
Yeah.
everywhere. It's kind of a bit grim. And so the motivation and the joy is not quite the same
Yeah.
as like walking in nature. And so it's not to say that I don't, it just definitely feels like a much harder task to engage with. Like I have to really like push myself. And actually, I'm lucky that I have a gym upstairs in my flat and it
Well, that's good.
overlooks London and it's got one of those techno gym kind of things. So like I will walk on that and kind of look out at the rain and I'm like, okay, this is nice. However, I do remember Huberman talking about the research on walking in the morning is you need to have things moving past your vision for it to have that cognitive impact. So like walking on a treadmill maybe isn't as effective
Well,
as walking through the
maybe
streets. But I'm like, you know what? It's
just
good.
buy three monitors and like put them on the side and you're sorted. Walking under
No,
the rain.
exactly. I'm like, it's as good as it's going to get. But I do look. I think that a morning walk is definitely like super important. It's just not always accessible to everyone.
Yeah. So you were saying that you're an entrepreneur. You're your own boss. Are you able to balance your time? Is it easy for you to cut off work and everything? Are you strict on
Mm,
that? Like, do you take weekends? Do you take like
nope.
off time, holidays?
I, no.
No.
And like, hey, I know that that's not necessary. That's definitely a downfall. But
I'm not the one who's gonna tell you like that I'm better than you on that. So like it's just interesting. It's just interesting because I think I have the same mindset as you. It's like I
yeah,
know it's not perfect and I would like to be better at it, but it's very hard.
same.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and also like I'm the same as you. Like I'm consuming probably the same content as you, and so I see all the entrepreneurs that are out there that are like on the Alex Hormozy and Layla Hormozy, and like they're constantly like and they're making
Yeah.
what do they say? They say they make 300 pieces of content a week or something, and I'm just like what? And so there's always someone doing something better than you. There's just always someone that's better at something. And so you just have to manage. That's the thing. It's like you have to like put those blinkers that they put on racehorses on to just like focus in on your own stuff. Like, are you hitting the tasks that you set for yourself each week? Don't worry about what John and Layla are doing anywhere else in your life. Focus on yourself. And then, sure, like at the end of your day, maybe you want to like take those blinkers off for a second, get some inspiration from other people, and then put them straight back on and go, okay, cool. Like reset if you need to, adapt, change if you need to. But it's the same stuff that we say to our clients with the training. It's like
Yeah.
sometimes this stuff can be so confusing. Looking at Instagram all the time, all the different information. Oh, I saw somewhere that I should be taking creatine. I saw somewhere that I should be actually doing 5 sets of 3 reps as opposed to 12 reps or whatever it might be. It's like people are so confused because there's too much information. And so then they fail to engage in anything consistently. And the same thing I think happens for us if we're building a business or working on business, is like nowadays there's so much business content online, so much
Yeah.
entrepreneurial content
Yeah.
that it's like, so we have to do the same
Yeah.
thing. We have to go, okay, I'm going to just try and implement these 3 things for 12 weeks and see if that had an impact on the trends in my data.
It's exactly that. When I was telling you like I was also looking at you, and I was super impressed. It comes down to that also, and it's hard. It's hard. Do you think that it has impacted you negatively to never cut off? Like, has it impacted
Yes.
maybe? I know it has had some impact on my health for certain periods, relationships, stuff like
Yep.
that. Is it the same for you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, like yes, full stop. And yes, I am lucky enough to be with someone now who like shares similar values. So we sort of have similar kind of like goalposts where we're like, okay, we know where the goalposts are. We know that there's going to be an element of that. Definitely with relationships, you do have to make time for each other and keep those things healthy. It makes it easier if you're working on the same, not necessarily task, but like if you're working in the same direction. It's when you have different expectations, different values, that things can kind of go haywire a little bit. But yeah, I would definitely say it's had negative impacts on my mental health because so much of my identity is wrapped into my success. And so if there's any point in time where the validation of success is not met to the expectations I've set, or worse, the expectations that I think I should have of myself based on what other people are doing, then I've found that that's made me feel really shit, and that's led to anxiety, and that's led to me creating content that isn't necessarily truly like an inspired action, and it's more like I have to, and that content just never does as well. When we feel like we have to make content, it just somehow, I don't know how, I don't know what the mechanisms are behind it, but it just somehow doesn't seem to do as well as the content that like comes from this place of like, I feel really inspired to share this. I feel really ready to like connect with this. But that's part of the process of like, bring it back to training. It's like, I'm always telling people like, try not to over identify with one data point. So like if you step on the scales one day and it doesn't reflect something that you were hoping for, that's one data point in one time period. What we're trying to look at is trends in data. So even if a single post or some piece of content that you create doesn't do that well, you can't look at that and be like, oh, that's it. I'm never creating content again, or I'm a failure, or I suck, right? Which is really easy to do. And it's what
Yeah.
people do with their weight or with their body
Yeah.
composition or something, you know what I mean? And so I just have to apply the same medicine I dish out to clients, really.
You created the perfect segue to. I have like a few rapid fire questions because I know you need to
That's
go
all right.
on with your day soon.
That's fine. Go for it.
So what is success for you? How would you define it?
So, not to come back to the biopsychosocial model, but definitely success for me is in some way feeling content in or having some level of like health through my physiology, my psychology, and definitely my social relationships. Definitely. And then I think like something that I talk about is like the BPS-ES model, which is like biopsychosocial, economic, and spiritual. Because I think that finances are so important to us these days, and they have more and more meaning. Money has more and more meaning for us. As we continue as a species, I think. And so I think that there is such a thing as economic health. And then I also think there's such a thing as spiritual health. And so I do think that those things need to get sort of wound into that model. So success would be like, some level of balance and contentment through each of those facets.
So you've been very general here, and I want to go a bit deeper on that. Okay. But like, for example, like Shona, 80 years old, I ask you, like, have you had a successful life, or are you content with your life? Like, what would you be looking at, like, primarily?
Okay, quick fire answer, I would probably be looking at my relationships. I'd
Okay.
say that they're probably the most. I mean, because even, at times when I've felt sick, it's like one thing we can't escape in this universe is the interdependency that we have with it, with our environment, with our other people, with everything, whether it's a stranger that we think we don't know, whether it's someone like cleaning up the streets versus like, our boyfriend or our girlfriend. And so I think relationships are probably the number one thing that I would be like at 80 looking back on and going, how were they?
All right. I like it.
And
Favorite
pass.
drink?
Favorite drink is is it really I'm going to say I'm going to be really boring
Water.
and say like water, but only because I'm really quite bad at it, and I've just started to get good, and I've just started to notice how magic it is. Like my skin's better, my cognition's better, like just it's one of those things where it's so boring to say to someone like, well, make sure you stay hydrated, but it's like, fuck man, that it is honestly a bit of a magic pill that we love to ignore because it's so shit. If I wasn't saying something boring and if I was still in a period of drinking, then I would probably say like I love the taste of whiskey, of a really good
Really?
Japanese
Oh,
whiskey.
wow.
Oh my gosh, like that was my dream drink. And then I gave up alcohol, but it was like I loved the taste of whiskey, and I didn't need to drink a lot of it. I wasn't aiming to get drunk on whiskey. It was like I liked the way that I could just sip it and have this experience in my mouth that almost felt meditative in a way, and I could feel it run down my throat, and just the whole experience of drinking a very good whiskey was so beautiful to me.
I thought you were going to say coffee because you Aussies are like insane on coffee. But okay.
Yeah. I think I like the effect of coffee more than the taste, to be honest, even though I'm a snobby about it, but I definitely prefer how it makes me feel than that bitter bean.
Do you have an inspiration, like someone who inspires you, and why?
Okay, this is always fluctuating, but I'm going to be very honest and tell you that I never respected mothers in the way that I now respect that
Mm.
process and that thing. And I know it's really cliche to say, and we hear it all the time, but anyone that's like experiencing this like birthing process is so like, it is so wild to me what happens that I have this whole new respect for just the female body. Actually, even if you're not having a baby, it's like this whole experience is just so, has changed the way that I look at this and the female body, just purely because I realized how much, or especially in fitness, we really treat female bodies as like little men. And now I'm like, oh gosh,
You know,
even
like
some of the things that I've said. Yeah.
I actually understood only like I think 3 or 4 years ago, the head of the baby had to go through like the pelvis. I know it sounds maybe stupid to a lot of people, but like I understood that like 3 or 4 years ago, and I was like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, now I
Yeah.
understand serious stuff.
Totally. And then also like, okay, I'm going to be honest and say that I didn't understand the pelvic floor in the right way. So a lot of actually what we're taught about bracing for weight training is
Mm.
obviously based on the data that we've taken from male bodies, and they don't have the same discrepancy in their pelvic floor because they don't have this extra hole that sits in the middle. So you guys have like way more musculature that sits around when you look at the difference between the male and female. And
It's still
then
problematic for a lot of male,
toad
like
100%.
it's
100%.
true.
That's true.
It's more prevalent in females because like you don't have an extra like a piece to hold stuff, like but yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, definitely.
Yes.
I have a
And
podcast actually on it
do you on
in
bracing,
French.
like on how? Oh yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's a
on the
good way for
pelvic
me to
floor,
practice.
like breathing and the complication that you have, especially in strength athletes, who
Yes,
who who get more and more stronger and stronger, but like don't understand how to brace correctly, or like have bad habits of
totally.
bracing, which is very complicated now.
And
Uh,
there's definitely like a push to like uh I feel like there's a push to almost like encourage people to have incontinence. In a way, it's kind of like, well, are you really hitting a PB if you didn't piss yourself? And so it's like, you know, I think for men it's one thing, but for women, one of the implications is that many of these women do actually want to have children later in life. And the issue is that if you have been bracing in that way, that is compromising the pelvic floor, that you may have a prolapse, and prolapse is not fun.
No,
so
definitely.
yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, there's not enough. So yeah, in terms of inspiration, I think I'm just really inspired by female form in a way, and just understanding how intricate it is and how incredible it is in a way that I didn't before. And it's not to say that the male form's not intricate and interesting as well. It's just that so much of the focus, at least for my life and my lens, has very much been on like, I think male form in a way, like based on what where the research has been, right? So yeah.
And pregnancy is going to be an impulse off timer, so that's going to be fun.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Good luck.
exactly. Thank you. Thank you. It's been
uh,
challenging to say the least. Yeah.
in which subject were you the worst at school?
I would say mathematics. And I have a psychological reason for
Really?
that, actually. Yes, I was terrible at
Was
maths
it a scheme?
because a schema. Yeah, it has a lot to do with the schema that was set up. So when my parents were splitting and things were like particularly violent, I mean, I've let go of this now and like opened my eyes to the idea. And this is part of that cognitive behavioral therapy of going, well, I can continue to tell the story that I'm bad at maths and continue to be bad at maths, or I can rewrite this story and just decide that I'm good at maths. And so as soon as I did that, I was like, okay, cool. I'm good at statistics. I'm going to nail this subject. And I've done really well in stats. But it's not having that, coming to that thing of being like, I'm bad at this. And it's because, yeah, when I was younger and I was doing math subjects, it was one thing that I sort of wasn't necessarily naturally good at. And so I would bring it to my dad to ask, like, could you help me with this assignment? He was under all kinds of stress, but I'm a child, so I don't really understand that yet. And so he would respond in a very emotional, let's say, quote unquote, impatient way, but I understand where the impatient came from. But it then made me feel very nervous. So for a very long time in my life, anytime, even the simplest equation, 2 plus 2, I would hear equation and my immediate schema would start to get into play and I'd start sweating. My mouth would dry up. I mean, even if I knew the answer, I would immediately like tense up, and I was having this very visceral, very, intense response to just mathematics as a whole. Didn't matter whether I was good or bad or whatever, just was like immediate. So yeah.
What advice would you give your younger self? 20 years old Shona.
I think that one of the best things that I ever started to apply was what other people think of you is none of your business. Because we're all behaving with our own schemas, as I said, our own projections, our own feelings about the experience that we've had in life, and we often project that onto other people. And therefore, anything that people feel about you is often a reflection of themselves. So whether it's good or it's bad, it doesn't actually matter. What matters is how you feel about yourself, and whether you're interacting with people in obviously a kind, non-harming way. But it's like, what other people think about you is none of your business. I let it dictate so much of my life, and it's caused me so much stress through my life, to the point, we all do, to the point where I was like, I don't even know who I am. And so actually, if you close that noise out, the sooner the better.
Yeah, I love that. I did a reel about that, saying that it's also something you can't control. You can't control like what people think about you. So whatever you do, just live your life, be authentic,
Just live your life.
to yourself, and yeah, it's most important.
It's the only thing you can do.
What scares you?
The first thing that came to mind, just because they're quick fire questions, free diving still. That's a very like physical fear.
Nothing under 20 meters.
Oh my gosh, it's still getting to me. I mean, I know you do it, and so you're a pro at this. But when I speak to other free divers, but okay, it took me years to get past 10 meters. So, it's changed my relationship with fear, though, I would say. And so definitely, like, I know that the fears lurk. I know that, fear for one's life is very real, and we're very good at ignoring it because we have to in order to engage with the world. So I'm not saying that we should think about death all the time, but I think that something that I've really respected about the freediving process has been that confrontation with how what your relationship is to death, to these things that we're so good at ignoring, because it changes the way you approach anything uncomfortable in life. So yes, but I think an overall psychological fear is just like not reaching my potential. The problem with that as a fear is that, like, as you get better, you push the goalpost further.
Yeah.
So then you're like, at some point you have to decide, like, okay, we're doing okay.
You need to enjoy the journey, because if you're just like
Yes.
looking at the deadline, it's yeah. For the story, like we actually met on a freediving course, and
We did.
I think it's very courageous of you to continue, to do something that like triggers triggers
So
something
much, yeah.
like into you, and I think that's very admirable.
But I mean, that's every freediver, no? I mean, surely at some depth, we're all going to get to the point where we are met with the fear that we're like, it's hard to get past. Or have you always just been like, I'm chill, this is so great, la la la?
I love it. I feel so good
Do
underwater.
you?
Like it's just like absolute peace for me. Like I go down, it's
Wow.
just like nothing is I love it. I've had like a few bad dives. For example, like
Okay.
I remember a dive where I was doing a hold at like 30 meters. So go to 30 meters, do a little hold, and like come up.
Come
And
back
I
up.
felt so good at the bottom that I kind of overstayed there. And after like coming back up, I was like, okay, like I might have overstayed. So I saw like 20, and then like 25, and then like sorry, 25, 20,
20.
15. And like at 10, I was like, wow, I'm really far, and I'm really like, contractions
I'm
and
out.
everything. Yeah. And I made it to the surface, but it was not a clean surface, like
Mm.
protocol. And that was scary. And after that, like I had like a period, like an extended period where like it kind of, like traumatized me a
Messed
bit,
with
like
your.
to, yeah, exactly. So then I had to like dive much more to overpass that and to not find myself in that situation. But yeah, that was very uncomfortable for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like how you deal with that discomfort, what it brings up for you later. And so, like, yeah, I lean into those experiences. I mean, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been the same for me. Like, it's you get into scary positions, and I think it's less scary than freediving actually, because you can't necessarily die in the same way that you can
For
die
me,
freediving.
I highly disagree with you on that.
Really?
I haven't done BJJ. I told you when we saw
Yes.
each other in Bali, like I really want to do it, but there's this component of like there's another person who potentially is going to break your elbow, shoulder,
Yeah.
knee, whatever, and I can't control that, and because I can't control it, it scares me.
Yes, and that's definitely how I felt when I first started it, because all the sports prior to that for me had been solo sports, so gymnastics,
Yeah,
things like that. So they're arguably dangerous, but like you're in control of the variables.
yeah,
Whereas yes, and actually all the injuries I've had from BJJ have been because like other people have done something in a really stupid way and their ego's gotten the better of them and they've done something. It's not necessarily been like I've let myself get in a bad position and didn't tap, which is obviously one way to get injured, and that's your own ego. But it was more like them doing a stupid. I had one person like jump on my leg trying to do something where you're supposed to jump around their hips, and then she jumped around my knees, and then like I nearly like completely
yeah.
damaged my knee, but luckily I have good internal rotation, like all these things. But it's just like, yeah, that is hard to grapple with. You're right.
It would be hard for me to control myself and not transition into a real fight right there on the mat, like being like, oh yeah, let's see, what are we going to
Totally.
do now? So really
Yeah,
hard.
totally. Yes.
I have so many other questions, but like we're going to like stop with the last one
We
I
could do
want
a
to
part two.
ask you
We could do a part two.
for today. Absolutely. Is what's the best advice you've ever received, or maybe the best advice you want to like give to someone? It could be anything, like really something that has potentially impacted your life, or you think that could potentially impact like other people's life. I know you talked about the
Mm.
fact that like you should
what other people think about you.
discard. Yeah, exactly. Which is, I think, a very important advice. But
Yeah, I think the next bit of advice is, okay, I'm going to give you two. The first one is read the book, The Four Agreements, which it seems like a wishy-washy kind of spiritual self-help book. But actually, if you take that wisdom of the Four Agreements, you can really apply it to your life in a very practical, pragmatic way. And it can basically, I think it changes people's lives. So that is an important book. But outside of that, I would say, because we live in this interdependent universe where everything is relational, I think it's important to understand what you're making other people's behavior mean about yourself. And if you can start to get to the bottom of that, then you realize where you're giving away your power or giving away your motivation to someone else. So for example, and I really learned this through, practicing non-monogamy was for me an opportunity to really challenge. And I would say I'm naturally a monogamous person, very, very naturally a monogamous person. And so it was really confronting for me to enter into a relationship style where it was non-monogamous. And I realized the reason it was so confronting was because I'd put so much of someone else's behavior or so much of my own self-worth into how someone else was behaving. So did they call me enough? Did they, do enough to show that they loved me? Because that demonstration of love was the only way that I felt like a worthy person. And so it really challenged that through the opposite. So through saying, well, let's take it to the nth degree. Let's take it to the degree of you're sleeping with someone else. You're sharing an intimate experience with someone else. And how have I told myself a story that means that person's better than me or worse than me? And so you can apply that concept to anything. You can apply it to how your clients treat you and things like that. If their behaviors are not in alignment with what you think they should be, what are you making that mean about you as a trainer? Does it mean that you're a bad trainer? Sometimes it might. Sometimes it might. But in other cases, it might mean that actually, like, you just need to stay strong in who you feel you are and your own values. So I would definitely say that it's not really advice, but it's definitely like leaning. Sometimes you have to run towards the things that are scaring you rather than away from them. So for me at the time, to really heal my relationships, I had to run towards the biggest fears that I had, which was like, well, if someone wants to sleep with someone else, or if someone wants to have a sexual experience with someone else, it means that I'm not enough or not lovable enough. And it actually fixed a lot of my own insecurities around relationships.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Big one. Not very fitness related.
No. Who cares? Like this podcast is not only about fitness. It's about like
great.
Helping people like improve their life on all different aspects. So yeah, I think it
Brilliant.
will resonate with a lot of people. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And
thanks for having
obviously
me.
all your socials will be like in descriptions and everything.
Amazing. Cool.
Anything you want to finish with, or?
No, just, check out socials, check out, as you said already at the beginning, my podcast. And then
very
that's
good
it.
podcast.
Thank you.
See you.